This is On-Nomi, a great new idea out of Japan. Online drinks with your friends when you can't be with them in person. Cheers. Hello everyone, we're back with another On-Nomi online drink, and today I've got the great pleasure of being having a drink with one of our long-time precision hydration ambassadors, Tracy Moseley, multiple world champion in mountain biking, downhill and enduro. How are you doing, Tracy?
Good, thanks. Yeah, good to see you, and well,
Good.
meet you across the internet.
Exactly.
These days.
yeah. It was. Can you remember actually how we first started corresponding?
It was through James Brickle, who is a long-term friend. From met him basically from racing bikes back in the early days. He then moved out to the Alps, and he's now actually working for Trek, the team that I work for. So I think it was through his connection that he put me in touch with you guys, because he'd used the product for many years and was a big kind of fan of it, and said you should try this when he'd seen me suffering out on the training rides. So that was how it started, I think.
James was a really early adopter of precision hydration. I think he was based in or near Lewes, where we started the business, near Brighton. So we got to know him really early on, and he absolutely loved it. And it was a great way, for him to share it with some of his riding buddies. And I remember that I got very excited because I saw an order coming through the website from someone called Tracy Moseley, and I thought I wonder if that's Tracy Moseley, because although I wasn't huge mountain biker, back in the early days, I did ride mountain bikes a fair bit in the 90s. My brother and I, so we were following the Malverns races and racing a few Southern Series and Midlands XC series. So your name was always around and about at that time. And then
that's right, you contacted me, didn't you? Because I'd ordered it on the website. That's right.
No, and I thought it was very cool because we at the time, and still now, we work with a huge amount of elite athletes across a whole range of sports. But I always wondered, I thought mountain biking, obviously the cross country side of things, is probably very hydration and electrolyte supplementation, especially in the hot weather, really important. But I wasn't so sure about the downhill and enduro side, and then learning a bit more about it, and especially now enduro scene's got a lot more competitive, and everyone's looking for an edge.
For sure is, I mean, you're out for the first early years. It was multiple big days, 5-6 hours in the saddle on 4 or 5 days consecutively. So, and you're carrying all your stuff with you. You've got to be pretty self-sufficient. There's no feed zones. There's no kind of water station out in the mountains. So it was probably more important those days than it was in the downhill days. So also now, the more professional it gets, definitely.
Yeah, because do you find that now it's sort of becoming a lot more? I know that mountain biking has become a lot more specialised. People are less inclined to race across the disciplines so much. Do you find that competitive level means people are looking at smaller gains all the time?
Yeah, definitely. I think looking back at downhill from 20 years plus when I started to now, it's a completely different sport in many ways, in bikes, technology, but also in looking at the athletes and how they trained and how they prepared. And back in the early days, it was very much a bit of fun, having racing your bike down a hill, having a beer in the evening, and hanging out with your mates. Whereas now it's those guys are really full on serious athletes that train really, really, really hard. And every little bit of marginal gain that you can get, you're looking for. So hydration is definitely one of the things that I think everyone's now taking an interest in and using to their advantage.
Yeah, and as a mountain bike rider, you've raced all sorts of disciplines over the years, but I guess people would predominantly know you as a downhill rider and an enduro rider. I'm guessing you've got you won multiple downhill World Cups and a downhill World Championship, and you won enduro World Championships. I think, was it 3 years in a row?
Yeah.
And can you explain for the people that are a bit sort of less au fait with mountain biking the difference between enduro and downhill?
Yeah, so enduro is very much a newer discipline, really. So downhill mountain biking has been around for a long time, and I raced that for between 10 and 15 years, kind of full time. So that's probably why I'd be more well known in that kind of area, because I spent a lot of time racing there. And downhill mountain biking is, for me, it's the equivalent of downhill skiing. So it's the same kind of idea. Top of a mountain, you're against the clock, one at a time, and you're trying to get yourself as fast as possible to the bottom of that course. It's all taped, it's all marked out, and it's just you against the clock. You get a chance to practice multiple times, but you just get one run that counts basically towards your final result.
Yeah.
So it's all out, full focus and commitment, and you definitely have to ride at 100%. Enduro is something that's come around kind of more recently. The first ever Enduro World Series was 2013. So I actually raced the first 3 years and won that world title in those first 3 years that it came around. And for me, it's a bit of a mix between downhill and cross country. So cross country is the Olympic format, the kind of endurance, multi-lap, up and downhill. So enduro racing, you basically do one big loop throughout the day, but you're only timed on the downhill sections in a way. So you almost have 4 or 5 stages that are timed throughout the course of a day. So there's a physical element in terms of getting around that 50 or 60k loop. You've got to pedal it, and each stage has a start time. So there is an element of, you can't just spend all day dawdling or pushing your bike there. You've got to have the fitness to get there. But the actual bit that's timed is just the predominantly downhill stage. So it's a mix of the two. You've got to have really good fitness, but you've also got to have the skills to be able to race for that 5 to 10, sometimes even 20-minute stages in the Alps. So it's quite an endurance feat, actually, enduro these days. And for me, it was the perfect mix of skill-based plus that fitness and just the chance to see the place you go to. You get to ride 5 different stages rather than just that one race run down a hill. So it was awesome.
Yeah, I guess it's what it feels a bit like is the kind of the big days out that a lot of people would have at the trail parks and things like that, where
exactly. Yeah,
you go with a bunch of mates.
It's the racing format of what most mountain bikers would go out and do at weekend with their mates.
Yeah,
and go and do a big loop and race each other down the fun bits, and that's exactly what enduro is, just in a competitive format. So I think it appeals to a lot of people, and most people can really relate to that, whereas many people wouldn't ever imagine racing down a downhill in the Alps as fast as they possibly could. So enduro is definitely kind of the sport and discipline for the masses.
Yeah, and nowadays you're still riding quite a bit and at a very competitive level, but you've also transitioned into a job role with Trek, the factory team who you rode for in the latter part of your career. Can you tell us a bit about what you do work-wise?
So I'm kind of one of the management team basically that helps run the Trek Factory's racing program. So we've got a downhill World Cup program, cross country World Cup team, and an enduro World Series team. So there's a group of us that all kind of help manage and run those teams. And my role is mainly with the cross country and enduro teams. It's more like an athlete liaison. So I'm kind of a link between the athletes and Trek as a company, making sure that they're happy, they've got what they need, trying to help plan some of their race plans, their training, a bit mixed of everything, basically, just being that connection between the athlete and the team, which I think is a really important role to get the best out of the athletes. And do a little bit of on-course technical training with the guys as well. So definitely still trying to keep my involvement in there, but not racing at that level anymore, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, it moves. It's getting faster and faster every year, isn't it? And it's I guess
and trying to find the time to train like I did with having a little one and getting to turn 40 plus is and just body's done a fair 20 years of racing at that level. It's nice to take a step back, but still kind of be able to be part of it, and still for me wanting to race as best I can at this stage in my life.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that actually. So you've made it easy for me going in that direction. But you and I are about the same age, early 40s. You've got a new little one, a little boy. How old's your little boy now?
He's 2 and 4 months, something like that.
Yeah. So sort of pretty early on with all of that. How did you find suddenly having all that parenting responsibility and then trying to find time to get out and train and getting into a new routine?
Yeah, it's definitely something that no one can ever really explain, what it's going to be like. And you're always like, I'll be able to do all this stuff. And even now, I think that first summer when Toby was only 3-4 months old, we went back to Europe and I was working at some races. And I look back now and think, wow, what was I thinking?
Yeah.
But I think when they're actually it's sometimes a bit easier. So that first kind of summer actually felt like it was quite easy because he just slept all the time. And to get out and do rides, obviously that bit changed. I've not been able to ever go out for more than a 2 or 3 hour ride without well, you never ride any time without watching the clock thinking I need to get back for this time, so and so's looking after him, or I need to feed him, or there's never any like bike riding that just could just end up being a 5-hour ride if I wanted by thinking, I'll just think when that lane goes, or wonder where this track goes. Those days are long gone. It's definitely pretty militant routine logistics and clock watching, but it's still cool, have the best of both worlds, to have a little guy waiting for you at home and to still try and get out there and ride. It's just being able to balance that, and for me it's being organized for sure is the key. You have to have a bit of routine. It's there's not too much spontaneity, sadly, in life, but it works and it's not forever. So at the minute, it's just nice being able to get back out and ride. And I think I appreciate that time so much more. You know, being able to actually go out for a ride now is something that I really look forward to, rather than it possibly ended up being a chore when you're a full-time athlete. So,
oh, definitely. Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think you definitely have to be organised and pre-plan, like you say, where you're going to go out and when, and all those kind of things. And you do. Yes, that's exactly the phrase that my wife and I use. We've got the tag team on a weekend. If we both want to go out and ride, then one of us will be waiting at the door, you know, when the other one comes back in. Yeah, it's right. Go. You've got 2 hours. Go. Yeah. But it does work, and you do appreciate that time, and you kind of. I've also found that with the recent period of not being able to travel so much and being, you know, staying in the one place, it's made me really creative about finding new routes to run and ride and all that sort of stuff. There's places we're down in the New Forest here, and I actually ended up buying a gravel bike because there were so many unexplored places, and I can't believe I've been here. I've lived here nearly 12 years. And half the trails, I thought I'd explored it, and then half the trails I just had never seen before.
Yeah,
it's been fantastic.
It's exactly the same thing here. You've ended up staying local. You stayed on kind of using the more traditional bridle ways, even going walks with Toby on local footpaths that I've never been to. You'd always just go to the place that you know to ride, or the local forest, or it's it's been cool. It's been really nice to stay home and be focused on just local stuff. So I think everyone's probably had that same experience, which has been great, and the weather's been nice, so we've all been able to kind of enjoy our location in the best of the year as well, really.
Yeah, and I guess being someone who's been a pro bike rider for many years and now working for one of the premier teams in the world, you've got quite a selection of bikes. What's the favorite one? If you could just like pick up a bike and go riding now, what's your go-to ride?
It's actually it's called a Trek Top Fuel, and it's basically a 120 travel bike. So in terms of suspension, it's on the shorter end of suspension spectrum. So my kind of enduro race bike would be 160, 170 mil of travel, and a cross country race bike would be 100 mil or 80 mil of travel. So it's actually quite a short travel bike, but for me, it's such a capable little bike. It means I can go on road or off road. You can mix up the trail type, and it feels like it's actually really quite capable descending. But it's still efficient. You know, I hate going out on a big kind of enduro or downhill kind of racy bike and slogging it up my local Malvern Hills because it's steep. It's a lot of pedaling. So I really like to kind of be maybe underbiked if I get to something technical, but have that help on the pedaling and that efficiency, and feel like the effort you're putting in is actually making you go forward. So I tend to have always, I guess, trained on a shorter travel bike because it makes it a bit more fun, a bit more kind of sketchy, and then you get on a bigger travel bike for racing, and suddenly like, wow, I'm on this bike, and it takes you down the hill. So that's my go-to bike at the moment, is jump on my little Top Fuel and get out for my hour and a half or 2 hours first thing in the morning is my training time. And that's certainly the one I choose most of the time, to be fair.
And I'm sure, you know, staying with the sort of technology theme, I'm sure back when you started, were you racing downhill and cross country on a fully rigid bike?
I had a suspension fork, so it wasn't big on the front, but I had a suspension fork that probably moved, I don't know, maybe 50 mil if I was lucky. But it was pretty much, it was a cross-country bike, as of you would think now, with, you know, even with flat bars, bar ends almost, no drop and seat post. You know, the frame was probably I think my first one was a 21-inch frame, and I ride a 7 frame, so like it was way too big for me.
Yeah, we all used to ride mountain bikes that look a lot more like road bikes, or they look actually a lot more like gravel bikes do now.
Yes,
with a high top tube and everything. Yeah,
about this much seat post, and that was it.
Yeah,
So crazy what I used to do on that.
If we'd have kept them, they'd be really cool again now. I'm sure there's probably a few on eBay. And in that time span then, between then and now, where for you was the biggest jump in technology in bikes and things, or was it an evolution, you know, that you lived through, because you've seen a huge change?
I think there was, for me, the one biggest one was when the first like full suspension downhill bike, specific downhill bike came in, and that was, you know, because the 95, 96, 97 even, I was still riding on almost like a kind of a cross-country bike that had a bit of suspension added. Whereas suddenly we've got an actual, this is a downhill bike. This is focused just for riding downhill. You know, big chain ring, suspension front and rear, disc brakes. All those things kind of came around about the same time, which for me was, I think 99 was the first time I got a proper downhill bike. So that was a big leap, because suddenly you had a specific bike for a job, you know, and that was incredible. And then I think there's been another kind of shift again in the kind of, certainly on the enduro bikes, idea of the dropper seat posts. And suspension that you can really, you can lock out suspension so it can be completely solid for climbing, remote lockouts. So that kind of suspension technology and the dropper seat post is then, for me, completely changed that trail bike market. So you can actually have a big travel bike now that you can ride all day, and it can be amazingly capable on down the track. You can still climb up a road climb for 2 hours. So that's made, for me, those two big areas, I think, have transformed the kind of the whole bike industry, really.
Yeah, versatility. And you touched on it earlier as well. In that time period, mountain biking's gone from being like basically a kind of a fringe activity to like going totally professional in all these different specialist areas. And the downhill scene always had the reputation of like lagging behind cross country and other areas in terms of like rider fitness and that sort of thing. It was seen as more of like a skill and balls basically to get down the mountain really fast. How much, sort of has that, the physical training element in downhill and enduro changed?
It's changed hugely. Now you could put, although it's still very specialized, those guys are training very much for their downhill racing is, between 2 to maybe 6 minutes would probably be a long track on a World Cup circuit. So it's a very kind of explosive, power orientated sport. Those guys won't be going out and doing massive road rides all year long as they're training. So it is specialized, but within that specialization, their training's at a super high level. They're all eating well. They're all got personal trainers doing gym, doing the on-bike stuff, all the technology, all the things out there, they're getting to help. And enduro, the same. Enduro does need a bit more of that kind of longer endurance ride. So they'll be mixing up more of the road riding as well as their gym and their on-bike training. But those guys are now, they're taking it fully seriously, and they look like athletes. They're training like athletes. They're sleeping like athletes. They're eating like athletes. They still have a beer and they have a party for sure, and they have fun. And I think the downhill mentality, if you want to take those risks and you want to put yourself in that space where you've got to go 100%, you are going to be a certain type of personality, and that's not the same as your average triathlete or your average kind of Tour de France road guy. There's a reason why that personality's found the sport. So there's always going to be there'll be a different person, but within that sport, they're certainly doing the best they can to take their sport seriously and do it to the highest level.
And I guess in your role with the team, you end up acting as a mentor to some of these younger riders coming through. What do you think is what's the sort of most impactful advice you end up trying to impart with these riders?
I guess one of my personal kind of goals or values, I guess, is to certainly from an early age is to not to specialize too soon into one discipline. And I think you see in so many sports now, especially Olympic sports, that have got that kind of, national governing body pathway, that you see so many youngsters that are kind of like forced down this pathway if you're going to be the next Olympian. And for me, the fun goes out of it. And that's when you start to drift off and you lose all these really talented kids when they get to kind of 13, 14, because they've just done nothing but, specialize in this one sport. So I'm a real big believer in, especially when kids are young, to make sure they still enjoy their school sports, to make sure that if they're mountain biking, they're still playing, doing skids and wheelies, and they're still doing their fitness training. But there's got to be some fun associated with all of the sport at whatever level. And even when you get to world championship level, okay, it can feel like work a lot of the time, but there still needs to be a fun element. So I really try and make sure that kids don't get kind of forced to specialize too soon, and also don't forget that they're a kid and they forget that there's other things they should be doing, and to make sure they're still going climbing and playing football with their mates, and within reason, obviously. I think that's the most important thing, that sport is it's sometimes a short-lived career, and it can be, there's so many things that can not go your way, injuries, illnesses, whatever, and you need to make sure that you've got other stuff going on in your life to make sure that life beyond sport is still something that's enjoyable and that's fun, and making sure you've got people around you that foster that, I think, is the most important thing.
Yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree, because I think as a sports scientist, I did a bit of work with talent identification many years ago with younger kids, looking at the sort of routes into different sports, exactly for those reasons you mentioned before, the Olympic programs and the national programs and that sort of thing. And for a while, there was definitely a perception that the common sense thing seems to be, okay, well, if you want to be really good when you're older, you've got to specialize young. because then you start to build towards that long-term goal. But a lot of the research does definitely show that if although we hear about the one-off stories, the Tiger Woods type stories and the Serena Williams type stories and that, or the Williams sisters type stories, where people have gone all at it from a young age and then been world beaters, they're the ones that stand out. So it reinforces this false belief that that's the way to do it. Whereas actually the vast majority of athletes that go on and make it have a really broad base of sport, either within a sport doing lots of different related disciplines until they specialize, or in fact just doing a whole range of different things, because that early specialization can really kill it. And I suppose in recent years you've seen, like, I've just finished Tiger Woods' book, that's why it's on the top of my mind. But it's an incredible and sad story, really, of basically what was borderline abuse as a child to get him up to that standard, and then it's not put him in great shape for the rest of his life.
That's exactly the point. It's amazing while it lasts, but then there is life after sport, and people often at the time don't realise that, because you do have to be selfish. You have to put everything into that one goal and that dream. But there's a lot of years later that hundreds of horrendous stories of retired sports people that just really, really struggle with mental health. And I think it's really important that we do think beyond just the now and the moment and the success, because success is great while it lasts, but it soon goes, and there's so many other amazing things you can do as well with life to get fun and some happiness from it. It's not just success and winning. So I think it's important to instill that from an early age, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Talking about success then, though, for a moment, and going back some of your major successes, you've got loads of national titles, quite a few world titles and things. But what's the race that, if you could go back and kind of relive it and relive the whole thing now, what's the one that sticks out in your mind as the most satisfying or the best memory?
I guess probably the one for me is the World Championships of downhill, just because it was something that I'd been kind of building to that for so long, that I remember, as a junior missing out on the Worlds and finishing off the podium, and then I'd spent that whole kind of downhill career just wanting to win those rainbow stripes. And for me, those rainbow stripes are such an iconic jersey to have within cycling. Every world champion in whatever discipline gets to wear a rainbow stripe jersey, so it was just something incredible that I just wanted on my wall. So I think that for me was the biggest success. It was that, to finally do it, a one-day race, all the pressure, all the expectation, all the years of trying and failing, to actually do it was amazing. And I don't think, although the enduro stuff for me has been in some ways more satisfying in a physical level and how I prepared and how I changed to it, I think the actual experience of becoming world champion and getting that jersey put on your shoulders and national anthem playing for you on the podium is something that will never be topped.
Yeah, absolutely. Where's your jersey now? Is it hung up proudly somewhere?
It is actually hung up down in I've got a little bit of an office that I probably should be in now, really, doing this, but down out on the farm. That is, it's up on the wall in there. So it's been tucked away for a few years, but I have got it out recently and thought I must put that up.
Definitely, that is one that has to be seen, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Very good. And last question for me then, as your little boy's grown up, have you started him on a bike as yet? Has he got a balance bike going or anything?
Yeah, for sure he has. And I'm already finding myself wanting to, making sure that I'm not going to be that pushy parent that I see and hate at every event that I ever go to. But I can't help wanting to love cycling as well. So both James and I are really trying to keep it fun, organic. He asked to ride his bike. He loves his little balance bike, and he was ripping around a pump track in Inverness last weekend, which both me and James made very proud. But it's certainly something that we don't do every day. We're not pressurizing him. I hope he'll always have nice bikes available for him to ride if he chooses. And I'm hoping it'll be led more from him. Although we're going to want to go out as a family and ride bikes. It'll certainly be part of his upbringing, whether he likes it or not, to a certain extent. But the racing aspect, then we're really keen for him to go climbing, for him to do running, to do other stuff as well, to make sure that he's having that an upbringing where he gets to choose, and from a skill set as well, that he's got good hand-eye coordination. He can play tennis, he can throw a ball. It's not just that he can ride a bike. So and I want to do fun stuff too, so I've got things that I never really did that I want to have a go at. So looking forward to it.
Definitely. So because my little boy, interestingly, although we got him balance bikes and things like that, showed very little interest, even though my wife and I ride bikes and we've always taken him out on bikes from a young age. Just never showed any interest, and he's 6 now. But when we went into lockdown recently, or a few months ago, one of the best things that happened was it just totally spontaneously he asked if we'd go out biking, and we said, well, yeah, we'd love to go out biking. Let's do it, sort of thing. And we said, we've got to get you balanced on the bike and everything like that. And what was incredible was, despite having really shown no interest, we got him out and he said, I can ride that bike. And I was like, oh, I'm not sure if you can yet, but we'll give it a try. And basically he toddled off on it and we were away. And like 12 weeks later, we're going and doing 6, 7, 8 mile rides. He comes riding sometimes when I go running. The only step back we've had recently is we started going to the little BMX track, pump track, BMX track near us, which he was loving. And then we had a big face plant the other day, and it's the first one. But luckily, my brother is a far more accomplished sort of mountain biker and dirt rider than I am, and he'd taken him down there and he'd given him a chat before, and he'd said, look, at some point you're gonna meet the gravel here. But that's okay, it happens. And when I picked him up and he was sort of crying and he'd cut his face and stuff, he said, Uncle Dave did say this would happen sometime.
Yeah, nice.
but he's already back on the bike, and we haven't been to the track again yet, but he's back at it. But yeah, it's quite
amazed how quickly they get. Toby's had a few good little offs already, and they just don't seem to bother him. Straight back up and wants to do it.
Yeah, they're pretty resilient. That's going to be my last question for you, actually, is Matt, you must have had in your long career some pretty big offs. What was the worst one, or the most
bizarrely
one?
I guess in the amount of years I've raced and the stuff I've done, I think I've probably come off quite lightly, but I do think that some of that's in the way you approach stuff. And I've always had a few mottos of, like, always look before you leap. You don't just chuck yourself off something not knowing what's on the other side, certainly when it comes to jumps. And so I've always probably ridden a little bit within myself, which has helped. But yeah, for sure, I've crashed many times. The worst one was a dislocated shoulder that was dislocated and out. And then I was in the middle of nowhere in Spain at a downhill race, had to spend 3 hours getting into a hospital with my shoulder out. Stopped at one, they still couldn't get back in, so it's another hospital. So it was a pretty painful experience. And that shoulder, even today, is still giving me a little bit of jip, and probably will forever. So, but yeah, that was the nastiest one, I think, in terms of pain. But yeah, lots of little niggles, and I'm sure I'll be quite an arthritic old lady when I'm about 60 or 70, but that's to be expected. I've had fun with the old body between now and then.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, good stuff. Well, thanks very much for your time today, Tracy, and for all your support of our brand over the years. We're glad to be able to support one or two of the riders you've put our way as well, and we would love to continue to do so. So I'll say cheers for now. Thanks very much for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you around at bike race in the not too distant future.
Yeah, I hope so too. Cool, thanks.
Cheers. Bye bye.
See ya.